Chapter 9. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. This proverb has its origins around the 17th century. It appears in one of the most influential works of literature of the Spanish Golden Age, Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. "'Tis the part of a wise man to keep himself today for tomorrow, and not venture all his eggs in one basket." Literally speaking, if the basket in which all of your eggs are dropped, they will most likely all break and you will have no more eggs. The proverb basically warns against putting all your hopes in one plan or completely relying on one person or thing, or organization for that matter. In other words, it's good to have a backup plan in case the original plan fails to yield fruit or fails. The safe job fallacy. For many decades, up to the early 90s, anyone who had successfully gone through school, studied, or learned a skill and found a good job was relatively sure of holding that job until retirement. In my grandfather's and father's generations, children were taught to work hard at school, go to college, find a good job, and basically live happily ever after. Things have obviously changed. Many of the companies that were until then considered secure employers regularly lay people off in spite of making profits. Globalization has also played a huge role in the layoffs. Many multinational companies are opting to shift their production to countries with cheaper labor in order to reduce production costs and hence maximize their profits. Reliance on technology and artificial intelligence has also played a part here, because many of the jobs that were previously performed by humans have been taken over by robots and other forms of automation. For these companies, it makes sense, because machines can work 24/7 without breaks. Their overall cost in purchase and maintenance is much cheaper in the long term than having to pay employees a regular salary and their retirement benefits. In some countries, it's compulsory for the employer to have a pension plan for all employees. The ushering in of the information age and the subsequent acceleration of technological advancement has also meant that some businesses and professions that used to be part and parcel of society have disappeared altogether. A good example are the video and DVD libraries that were available in many cities worldwide, where one could pick a DVD with a film of his choice, pay for it, and then take it home to watch. This was a very lucrative business for the owners at the time. Children in their teens today do not even know that such businesses once existed. Those who were in that business and failed to read the writing on the wall as far as shifting their business model is concerned had a rude awakening. Proverbially speaking, if their eggs were all in that one basket, they lost it all. All these examples point to the fact that, in our world today, solely relying on one source of income or plan is outright risky. During the writing of this book, an event occurred that had ramifications on the entire world, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people and shaking the economic fabric of even the most affluent nations in the world. The coronavirus, popularly known as COVID-19, broke out and continues to spread throughout the world, causing death and misery to people from all walks of life. To combat this pandemic, the World Health Organization advised governments all over the world to take drastic measures like total lockdowns in order to inhibit or at least slow down the spread of this deadly virus that primarily attacks the human respiratory system. Long-term financial stability. Emergency situations will always happen in life. A pandemic like the COVID-19 does not commonly happen, but there are other emergency situations that will always happen, and ignoring this is simply being naive. There are some life coaches and motivational speakers who claim that planning for or thinking about an emergency situation is being negative. I respectfully disagree. The fact of the matter is that emergency situations will always come, so it is better to have a plan to deal with them when they come. Financially speaking, it does not matter how much you earn if you live paycheck to paycheck. Saving up for an emergency fund is economics 101. If, for example, you earn 3,000 euros and save 300 euros every month and live on 2,700 euros, you can save up 3,600 euros a year. The rule of thumb is that your emergency fund should equal the amount of at least 3 months of your monthly expenses if you are single, or at least 6 months of your monthly expenses if you have a family. The reason is simple. If you were to lose your job or had another emergency where a lot of money is required, like a deposit to rent a property or make a down payment for a house, you can use the money from the fund to pay or use it to cover your expenses until you find a new job without suffering stress or anxiety. The first excuse that comes up regarding this topic is that living expenses are such that one cannot save up for an emergency fund. This excuse resonates with me because I once thought that way until I realized that it was just a lazy excuse. I went through my expenses and had to make tough decisions. I decided, for example, that I would prepare my own lunch and take it with me to work to avoid spending money in our cafeteria or at a restaurant. Coupled with that, I bought myself a thermos mug so that I would always make my own beverages. Think of it this way, a cup of tea at a fast food restaurant in Germany costs about €2.30, and at a normal restaurant, about €3. If I go to the supermarket and buy a package of tea bags, it contains 25 bags and costs a total of €2. So, for the price I pay in a restaurant for 1 cup of tea, I can drink 25 cups by buying it and making it myself. Instead of making excuses, take an honest look at your expenses and ask yourself what is necessary and what is not. Because, as mentioned earlier, an emergency will come along the way, whether you believe it or not. Dr. Lynn Richardson, one of America's most respected African American financial coaches, talks of the 5 F's that keep most people from being financially free. The first F is feeling. When you start feeling sorry for someone, feeling guilty about it, and feeling that that person deserves your money, and therefore feel obliged to help that person, hence breaking your own budget limits, you're on your way to being broke. Because financial stability has simple mathematical rules that cannot be broken without consequences. Those who regularly face this difficulty of feelings versus financial common sense are parents. When your child comes to you wanting the latest sneakers because other kids also have them, or that child wants to go to an expensive school that you clearly cannot afford, it can be hard as a parent to say no. But saying no would be the right thing to do. To create wealth, you must live below your means, which means spending less than you earn. The second F, according to Dr. Richardson, is your family. If people in your family have been benefiting from your spending habits, even though these habits were not good for your finances, and you decide to change these habits, for example, by budgeting and hence cutting down on some expenses that affect them, they will be totally against it. In some cultures in Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and South America, this problem is even greater, because whoever has a job is expected to take care of his parents, siblings, and sometimes even relatives. The pressure to fulfill this cultural expectation is so strong that a lot of young people literally start their careers in debt in order to please their families. People from these countries who live in West Europe or North America face even more pressure because their families assume that since they live in rich countries, they must have more money and therefore should help even more. I have some acquaintances from these regions living in Germany who choose to rent one-room apartments and eat a cheap, unbalanced diet in order to send money back home every month. There is absolutely nothing wrong with helping your family, but it should be within your budget and should not push you into debt. Dr. Richardson's third F is friends. The people you associate with most will always influence you whether you believe it or not. Most experts believe that you are the sum total of 5 of your closest friends. If your closest friends are people with bad financial habits, this might influence you mid or long-term spending behavior. They might have the habit, for example, of spending money regularly in restaurants and bars, and because you are a close friend, you might find yourself going out with them regularly and spending money as well. This confirms the saying, "Show me your friends, and I'll tell you your future." The fourth F is food. Dr. Richardson found out after helping clients to track their expenses that they spend 20 to 30% of their income on takeout food, which is quite incredible. Just as I found out with buying tea at a restaurant, making your own food can save you a lot of money, and also gives you the benefit of more control on what and how you cook it, resulting in better health. The fifth F that makes people broke, according to Dr. Lynn Richardson, is fun. A lot of people ignore their budgets or even go into debt in order to have fun. They prioritize having fun now at the expense of their own financial future. This is basically living in denial, because the reality catches up with you sooner or later. When reality hits, it can hit really hard, and the rebuilding is not fun at all. It could even be too late. Some people are forced to work more years after their retirement age because of this. Apart from budgeting and saving, financial stability can be achieved by starting a small home-based business to supplement your income from your normal job. This means you are not depending entirely on the income from your job, and secondly, you earn more money in total. Business owners also save on taxes because they can legally write off more expenses, in the end, keeping more of their hard-earned money than employees. If, for example, they are using their computer for an online home-based business, they can write off the cost of purchasing the computer, the use of electricity, and the rent for their home office. For those who have reached a point where they have earned and saved a good amount of money, it is also wise to invest that money in assets that will produce a steady cash flow without working for it. Your money will be working for you. In other words, passive income. One of the best assets for passive income is real estate property that is rented out to tenants who pay regularly and on time. Assets that experts also recommend for this purpose are exchange trading funds, popularly known as ETFs. Investing in ETFs basically means buying a basket of securities, shares of which are sold on an exchange. Because these securities and shares do not belong to one but several companies, the risk of losing one's money is drastically minimized, and the interest on the money in the end is far better than simply keeping it on in a savings account. Studies of the lives of the most influential people show that most of them have multiple sources of income. Apart from increasing their wealth, these multiple sources of income also give them financial stability because they have more buffering in the event of a financial crisis or an emergency. Change your plan. Don't give up on your goal. Let's assume you have a certain goal and then create a plan to achieve that goal. You are totally convinced that it's a perfect plan. You are fired up and start working on the plan. You try for a long time, but the plan just does not yield the results you want. You then remember having read somewhere from some guru that one of the habits of successful people is tenacity. They just don't give up. This gives you renewed energy to keep pushing relentlessly. But after a long time, the results are the same. You are not making progress. You start doubting yourself, thinking that there is something wrong with you. You think the plan is perfect, but you are just not good enough to implement it, although you did exactly what your plan says. Jim Rohn, one of the best motivational speakers that ever lived, once said, "The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." In other words, if you keep on doing what you've always done, you'll keep on getting what you've always got. If it's clear a plan is not working, you need to abandon it and create another plan, no matter how good you thought the first plan was. The question here is not giving up on your goal. You are just changing the plan that obviously doesn't work with a new one. You are not putting all your eggs in that one basket. If the second plan does not work, replace it with a third one. Keep doing that until you find a plan that leads you to your goal. This is what tenacity is about, choosing to abandon an approach that doesn't work in favor of an approach you will eventually find that works for you. I should mention, however, that I am not advocating working on many plans at the same time. All I am saying is that you should create a plan and totally focus on it. But if you realize it is clearly not yielding the desired results, then you have to be honest with yourself. Set your ego aside and create a different plan and start working on it again with focus. It's not about many plans at the same time, but rather one after the other until the desired result is achieved. Thomas Edison, the great inventor who patented more inventions than anyone else to date, was a great example of this philosophy. He had a goal to invent the light bulb, and therefore made plans to attain this goal, and set out to do it. His different plans did not fail once or twice or even 100 times, but rather 9,999 times. Think about that for a moment. Most people would give up after Plan 20 failed, but he kept on creating new plans every time he had failed. He did not doubt his goal or think it was a stupid idea. He knew what he wanted to achieve and was ready to keep going until he got there. At one point, one of the partners he was working with on the project urged him to forget about it because he had tried so many different plans, but without success. This is how Thomas Edison responded. I have not failed. I have just found several thousand ways that won't work. That is true tenacity from one of the world's greatest inventors of all time. Small wonder, then, that so many inventions were patented under his name. When Henry Ford had the idea of building an 8-cylinder engine, most experts at the time thought he was out of his mind. He had a talk with his engineers and made it clear that they should start working on finding a way to build an 8-cylinder engine. Some of the engineers told him that this was impossible. He insisted that they do it anyway, and they had no choice but to heed his directive if they wanted to keep their jobs at the Ford Motor Company. After about 6 months, the engineers had not yet found a way to build an 8-cylinder engine. Henry Ford insisted that they keep formulating new plans until they succeeded. They did so, but even after 1 year, the project did not seem to be bearing any fruit. Ford is quoted as telling his engineers, "Go ahead and stay on the job until you succeed, no matter how much time is required." He checked on them again after a couple of months, but they had not yet achieved their goal. It seemed impossible to them. "Go right ahead," he said. "I want it and I'll have it." His persistence paid off. The engineers did find a plan that worked, and the famous V8 motor was produced. Ford knew what he wanted, and his engineers exhausted every possibility until they found one that helped them achieve their goal. If they had stuck to the initial plan, it would not have worked, no matter how many times they might have tried it. They did not put all their eggs in one basket. Putting all your eggs in one basket is basically limiting your scope. Most people do this out of the conditioning they had from their parents and their society. There are so many different possibilities available to achieve different goals. Insisting on one way of doing it, especially when it's clear that it's not working, is like standing in the way of your own progress.